So today I am going to be doing something slightly different, as we are going to essentially be doing an anti-TBR, or all of the 2024 releases that I definitely will not be reading. So this is by no means an original concept. I've actually done a couple of anti-TBRs in the past, although it was quite a few years ago. But the specific person that kind of inspired this video and specifically did 2024 releases and reminded me that this video concept exists was Steph from the Novelty Corner. So I will link her video down in my description box. But these are essentially going to be books in series that I've tried and I didn't like, and like the newest installment is out in 2024, or authors that I've read from previously and I didn't like them to a degree where I definitely would not pick up any books from them in the future. I am going to put them in this video in the order that they are released, although I'm not going to give you guys the specific dates. And I think that there is also one exception to that, because we have one author that I don't particularly love anymore with 2 releases in 2024. So the first book I have is Emily Wilde's Map of the Hinterlands by Heather Fawcett. This one is the sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which is a book that I read in 2023, and I actually enjoyed it. It is a almost cozy fantasy about this girl who travels to this northern European island because she's building an encyclopedia of fairies and she wants to categorize their fae for the first time. However, she's not really much of a people person, and so she is struggling to get on with the local townsfolk until her academic rival turns up and starts to infuriate her, because he is very much a people person and he seems to be excelling in this project a little bit more than she is. So I really liked Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. However, I personally don't have anything left from reading that book that I'm intrigued about enough to want to read another installment in this world. If you like cozy fantasy, I think that you will enjoy this series in general, but for me, while I liked it, it wasn't enough for me to have any desire to revisit this in the future. Similarly, we have Mislaid Parts Half Known by Shauna Maguire. This one I think is like the 9th installment in the Wayward Children series. I gave the Wayward Children series like a good go. I read books, did I read book 1 twice? And I also read books 2 and 3, and I just don't love novellas as a whole. I would rather read an 800-page book than a 200-page book, and I just like more content, more depth. Like I always just want more, and novellas generally don't provide that for me. And then as well as that, we have the disjointed format in the Wayward Children series, because if you're unfamiliar with this one, it is about, is it Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, which are essentially children that have been to portal worlds and have returned, and the majority of them don't want to be back. They're struggling to fit back into society, which is how they end up at this home. So the books in the series alternate between a book that's set at the Home for Children and a book that's set in a portal world, and I think that this newest installment is set in like a dinosaur world. Because of the nature of this series and how they're all set in different worlds and following different themes, they are just generally very hit and miss for me. I think my favorite of the ones that I read was the second one, and the first one had a murder mystery format, which I didn't really like. So for me, it's just not worth the investment of my time to like pursue this series, but I know that it is one that a lot of people really love. The author that has 2 releases this year is Jennifer L. Armentrout. The first one is Visions of Flesh and Blood, and this is one that I can say there is a 0.5% chance that I will ever read this. Like I'm truly not interested, because this is a companion to the Blood and Ash world, which is that really necessary? Do we need that like it's a movie franchise? Because those books, like, they don't add anything for me, they just reference stuff. It's just about the world of Blood and Ash. And then the other release is the final book in the Blood and Ash series, which is Born of Blood and Ash, I believe. There's a couple of things with this series that really stress me out. The first is that I really liked book 1 and 2, and I really didn't like book 3, to the point where I really just don't think I'm going to continue on with the Blood and Ash series. Why are we recycling all of the words? There are so many words in the world. Why are we just using the same ones over and over again? How many spin-offs are we going to have in this world? You're telling me this one's the conclusion? I don't know if it is, because I heard that there was rumor of a spin-off. The series was also extended. I think it was supposed to be 4 books and then it ended up longer. Is it at 6 now? And I just don't feel like it needs to be, because of how much repetition was in the 3 books that I read. So Blood and Ash, if you guys are interested, because like you guys might like things that I don't like, so some of these might end up on your radar because of the things that I've said I don't like about them, like the Wayward Children series, for example. But Blood and Ash is a hyped fantasy romance series following a girl called Poppy, who is the Maiden, which is this almost like religious figure. She's not allowed to experience pleasure, she's not allowed to talk to anybody, she's kept in this very kind of like sanitized sexualized existence to preserve her for this maidenhood. However, she doesn't actually know what this entails, and she is assigned a bodyguard who is this guy called Hawk, and it's a fantasy romance. There are vampires in this world as well as like other fantastical creatures, and it's a good time until it's not. So I personally don't think I'll be continuing, and just how much it branches off and how much extra is in it, I think it's a little bit convoluted for me at this point. So I think I have the first book of the spin-off series, which I've heard is quite good, but I also like the first book of Blood and Ash. So does that series continue to be good? I've also heard it's a repeat of Blood and Ash. Do I really need to read that again? I don't know at this point. There is a small chance, a larger chance, that I would read the last book in the series than I would read Visions of Flesh and Blood, but I think I should pretty much cut my losses with Blood and Ash at this point. Next up is Fatebreaker by Victoria Aveyard. I think that this is the third book in the series that Realmbreaker is the first book of. I used to love Victoria Aveyard. The Red Queen series, still one of my favorite series of all time. It's like a dystopian alternate future kind of series, but it also has a lot of high fantasy elements. So this was like my real introduction into high fantasy, like the first real high fantasy I'd ever read at the time that Red Queen was released. So I was really excited for Realmbreaker, because that is a multi-perspective high fantasy by Victoria Aveyard, which is like, I would say multi-perspective high fantasy is probably my favorite like fantasy subgenre. However, I just felt that it was so boring. It's following this guy who is the chosen one, and he has a twin brother who is bitter because he wasn't the chosen one even though they were twins. So he is threatening to rip open all of these holes between the realms, and if he succeeds then all of the realms are kind of going to collapse on each other. So the main characters, who are a bunch of people who are adjacent to these twins, are trying to get the realms, or like the countries, to rally together to stop this guy, but nobody really seems interested, so they take it upon themselves to try and stop him from ripping open all of these portals themselves, using somebody who they think is of the same bloodline. It even sounds interesting. It was kind of boring though, and I was real disappointed. One of my worst books, I think, of 2022, so I definitely will not be continuing with this series, although I would potentially try something else by Victoria Aveyard, and if I didn't like that, then I probably just wouldn't continue with Victoria Aveyard in the future. One that I'm very unsure about is The Voice of the Wretched by Kester Grant. This one is the sequel to The Court of Miracles. Was that released in 2021? It was a few years ago now, and I read it shortly after its release. It is a Les Mis retelling, and that is all I can tell you about it at this point, because it's been that long since I read it. I enjoyed it when I read it. I think I gave it 4 stars, but my kind of problem with the sequel is that it's been so long since I read book 1 that I couldn't go into book 2 now when it's released this year without rereading it, and I don't think I enjoyed book 1 enough to reread it. It's a book that's kind of like was good in the moment, but it didn't leave a lasting impression on me, so the amount of effort and time it would take to reread it I don't really think is beneficial, which is sad, because if this sequel would have come out a little bit sooner I would have reread, but at this point in time I think it's a little bit too late. One that I absolutely like didn't even know was being published until I looked this up. By the way, on the browse section of Goodreads there's upcoming releases where they tell you all of the books coming out by authors that are on your shelves, and that is the only place that I went to for this list of books. But one that I did not have any clue was being released. I actually thought that maybe the publication had been erased of this series. Well, that is Infinity Kings by Adam Silvera. Can't even tell you the synopsis of the first book in this series, which is Infinity Sun. In the last 4 years, I've only had 2 1-star ratings, and Infinity Sun was one of them. When I went into it, I didn't think that Adam Silvera was somebody based on his writing in his contemporary or more speculative fiction that I've read. I never thought that he would be somebody well suited to writing a fantasy, and I just feel like I was kind of right. I ranted a lot about this book and this series in 2020, and I actually did not know that they were continuing to publish these books, because I know that the amount of people that liked this book is very minuscule. We'll find out what the average rating of Infinity Sun is on Goodreads. 3.29. which is it's kind of low. Anything below a 3.5 is a little bit sus in my opinion. So that one it's not it. Another author that writes pretty much exclusively fantasy, and I have not liked. I've tried multiple different types of books by this author and have liked none of them, and that is Holly Black. The 2024 release is The Prisoner's Throne. I believe that this is related to the Cruel Prince series, which is a series that I have not read, will not read. I've tried one of Holly Black's other very books that isn't The Cruel Prince, and I've read one of her like more urban / contemporary fantasies, although everything she writes I think is contemporary fantasy. And I do have the Book of Night, which I got as part of subscription boxes that I'm a rep for, so I will give that one a try, but I'm not expecting grand things. So Holly Black for me writes in a very contemporary way, and I like my fantasy to be fantastical. I like my fantasy authors to world build. I like the writing to be a little bit more descriptive, a little bit less colloquial, and Holly Black provides none of that for me. Like, it's just not an immersive experience, and I feel like I have to do more work in the world building than Holly Black does. So while a lot of people, because of my love of Fae, have told me in the past to read The Cruel Prince, while I have seen gorgeous fan art of Jude and Carden that has tempted me to read The Cruel Prince in the past, this whole universe and Holly Black is just really not for me. Emily Henry's 2024 release is Funny Story, and I think that this is a little bit of an opposites attract relationship about a girl whose fiance leaves her and she ends up living with this guy who she builds a tenuous friendship with, which I'm assuming eventually builds into a relationship. Now, I'm actually never saying never with this one, because I've read one Emily Henry book in the past and I didn't like it. It was People We Meet on Vacation. I found it to be very mediocre. I do also have, I think, Book Lovers by Emily Henry, and until I read that, I'm going to kind of reserve my judgment on Emily Henry. I know that Emily Henry can be quite a divisive author, where some people really love one of her books but there's another one that they really don't like. But at the moment, Emily Henry is not an author that I'm like super hyped to run out and buy this one. But I do, like, I'm not saying never on this one, it's just not a release that I'm particularly hyped for. We have The Court of Wanderers by Rinch Pecco. I believe that this one is the sequel to Silver Under Nightfall, which was a book that I read for the GSFF series and one that I thought I was really going to love because I enjoyed the Bone Witch series by Rinch Pecco. But this one is following a guy who ends up, I think he ends up in a throuple with a couple of vampires, and he is a vampire hunter. I can't remember why I didn't love it. I feel like it had a murder mystery kind of tone to it, but also a lot of the story was the main character stood in a room while all of the side characters talked about the actual plot, and he just stood there and kind of like absorbed that information, and I didn't really like the writing style or the tone, although the atmosphere at the beginning I did enjoy. So I'm not going to be continuing on with this series obviously, and won't be buying the sequel, but I know a lot of people say I DNF that book where it gets good, and a lot of people ended up really enjoying this one. And then the last one we have is Blood Feast by Violet Roth. I'm not sure what number this is in the Blood Mercy series. Is it the Blood Grace series actually? I think it's like book 8 or something. But the Blood Grace series is a very slow moving political high fantasy romance about a girl who is the bastard daughter of the king, and she really does not like her father, but she maneuvers herself to be at the same place as the royal court in the summer so that she can get close to a Hesperine. The Hesperines are vampires and they are hated by everybody, but they're actually the antithesis of like vampire lore that we're familiar with. They commune with nature, they like don't kill when they feed, and they're generally very peaceful creatures, but it is the agenda of their surrounding nations that villainize them so much. So the main character has her own agenda for wanting to talk to one, and the first book is told essentially over a series of conversations that she has with this Hesperine as they slowly grow closer together. Now, I actually really enjoyed book 1 in that series, but it is so slow moving and so heavy on details. Like, we spend a lot of time talking about why these particular animals are used as transport in this particular city and little bits like that, while the romance has absolutely no stakes. Like, I have no doubt that that romance will be perfect and be perfect forever. There's no miscommunication, which is fine, but also there's no stakes being provided by the plot in what I read. I think I gave up at like book 3 because it's so slow moving that the action scenes and like the actual threats from the plot are few and far between. Whereas I feel like if the plot was a little bit faster paced, not even super fast paced, but like the second book had a like conflict right at the beginning in like the first 100 pages and then nothing for the rest of the book, and that was like going into book 3. So yeah, that series sadly isn't for me and I won't be continuing. It's such a long series as well, with every book being like 600 pages, that it's just so much for so little progression in my opinion. But that one did start out strong, and I know a lot of people who like really enjoy that series. It just wasn't, because I love slow political stuff, but that was like slow and super political even by my standards. So those are all of the 2024 releases that I'm not hyped to get to. I know that this video seems like super negative, and it is, like, it's obviously me telling you about hyped releases and why I don't like them or don't want to read them, but I do feel like these videos do have a purpose. Like if you guys love really slow, low stake political books, maybe you're gonna run out and you're gonna buy the Blood Grace series now and eat it up. Sadly though, it wasn't for me. It's also just a little bit of a reminder of things that I read in the past, didn't love so much and won't be continuing on with. And I do feel like it's an interesting kind of counterpart to the books that I'm super excited about. And maybe if you're new to my channel, you'll get a little bit more of insight into the kind of things that I like to read based on the things that I don't like to read. But down in my comments, let me know, oh, this could hurt me, because there's a lot of really hyped books coming out in 2024 that I'm gonna be picking up and I'm really excited about. But it's fine. I've got thick skin sometimes. But down in the comments, let me know what 2024 hyped release you are not going to be picking up. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as the link to my Bookish Candle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.